Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today I'm finally doing our Violet review, the third and final character I'm reviewing for the Persona 5 collaboration. A lot to say on her. So the review breakdown today, I'm going to go through the character overview, the base stat analysis, the report card, then my general thoughts encapsulating everything we'll talk about in the presentation, class and job overview where I go through the abilities and talk about what I think is valuable and where I think you'll get the most use out of things. I have a special segment here called a crit rate highlight where I essentially talk about her critical hit rate potential and crit avoidance of the enemy to kind of get a general sense of where you need to get a sweet spot for her dexterity and crit rates. And then we'll go through notable vision cards, notable espers, weapon optimization, and then some Truststone recommendations. So without delaying things any further, brand new light element unit. She's got the faith job that they made for her, duelist and gunner as the sub jobs. She equips a sword and hat cloth and accessory with a move of 4 and a jump of 2. So ton of mobility there. 10% dark to 10% weak to dark, no surprise there. In terms of weapon type resistance, is not terribly bad. A little unique in that 15% to strike is your strongest one. You obviously don't see strike prevalent through most of the game, but 10% to slash and 5% to magic are at least good starting points for those more popularly used types, with -10 to pierce and 0 to missiles. So overall, definitely some things to be exposed on Violet potentially, but not in the worst place to begin with. She's a unit that you're very likely going to keep at 50 faith, so status ailments aren't a huge concern, but she does have resistances to blind, slow, and immobilize. Overall, those are some pretty popular PvP ones that you see, so decent enough for what that's worth. Now we get into the base stat analysis. This is, again, a critically important thing to understand because so many things scale off base stats in this game in terms of passives, subvision cards, trust stones, the passives on the trust stones, all of that. So I talk about this in conjunction with the report card because we at least want to understand the base stats of the characters for when we apply all those things to them in game. Now from an HP perspective, she's at 2831 versus a UR average of 2983, and while a lot of you may look at that and go, okay, so she's kind of weak, 100% below average, you have to remember the context. She is an evade unit. We'll talk more about that soon. And so overall, for that HP pool compared to the evade units, it's actually relatively strong. You can see Elena's base HP is this 2767. Locke's is down here at 2746. So at least base HP wise, she's right around where you'd expect an evade unit, and a little bit higher than her counterparts. From an attack perspective, I have the average here of the UR sorted by only the top half of the list, as to not include the magic users. That's just totally arbitrary. And the UR average of attack there is 372. She comes in at 365 for base attack, so right around that average. It's not a terrible starting point. She does have some things that makes up for it, though. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but overall it doesn't have as high of a base stat as many of the other physical attackers do. And that's okay, because a lot of her kit relies on critical hitting things, which kind of makes up for the damage output to some degree. We talk about agility here now. So 64 agility. She's got the third or the second highest base agility out of all the URs. Really great starting point for her. And although you might think she becomes an extremely speedy unit because of it, she doesn't have any passives that boosts it like many of the other characters do. And so she is still very fast, but not to this level that you might get the impression based off the base stats, which is fine. That just means she's going to get more benefit when you apply agility buffing things to her. From a dexterity perspective, this is where you really want to focus on her kit, because since she is so critically hit dependent, her dexterity stat is very important. Now she's at 214 against the dexterity average of 199. Probably not as high as I would have liked to see, but she certainly gets high enough that she gets the job done. Definitely do want to equip some critical hit rate up things to her, that we'll talk about a couple options as to what. This also kind of feeds into the overall accuracy as well, where she is good for accuracy, and this is a big part of why. The luck is also one where obviously very high luck units also tend to be very accurate, because that's part of the equation. But a UR average luck of 168, her base luck is at 178, which actually isn't nearly as high as you might think. This list is actually starting at rank 16, so she's ranked 32 out of the whole list. So for an evade unit, that's definitely a little bit lower than where you might normally like to see them, just purely speaking from a base luck point of view. But she does have enough things that she ends up being just fine as an evade unit. We'll see that on the report card here. So from an effective HP standpoint, I'm actually starting to get more comfortable with how I give these grades, and quite honestly, I'm going to start being a little bit more critical. So if you do compare these grades to some of the older ones I've done, you might see some things that are, seem inconsistent. But the point of the report card isn't to be exactly mathematically quantitative on what someone's grade is. It's really supposed to be just indicative of my overall feelings and where you might need to work on things. So effective HP, she's a C. She's average, and that's fine. She's an evade unit. She shouldn't have a terribly high amount of HP. And when you're talking specifically about physical HP or magical HP, it's relatively about the same. C across all of them because she doesn't have any, glaring weaknesses. She's at 0 defense and 0 spirit. So that's a big factor why she ends up kind of staying around the C area, where she doesn't have any innate defense or spirit to mitigate damage otherwise. But she does have courage, which helps with survivability, and adequate HP for an evade unit. We'll just leave it at that. But from a primary stat perspective, as we saw, her attack stat wasn't the highest, but it ends up being in an A-. So although the base attack is lower than you might think, she does end up having a relatively high total attack because her mastery ability gives her 15% extra attack. So although she may not get as much benefit from attack boosting vision cards and equipment, this mastery does at least give her enough stats that she is relatively near the top and will be competitive for what her attack stat should be. So I'm giving her an A- on that note. Agility wise, I'm ending at a B+. It's actually not as fast as you would have liked. There are no passives for boosting her agility, and although the base agility is very high, there's not a ton on the board to really jettison her up to the top of the list. So it's really not bad, but it is a B+. But she will benefit from things that boost her agility, meaning like unit affinity when she's near other units. If you're putting Bahamut on for the 8% agility boost, so she ends up being okay in practice. It's really not that bad. From an accuracy perspective, actually lower than you might think as well, but not terribly unsurprising given where you saw her dexterity and luck stats were. She doesn't have any passives that boosts the luck or the dexterity or the accuracy. So she's little bit above the average by, let's say 10 or 12%, which is fine. It's great, but really nothing within her kit that puts her higher than that. And while above average, not nearly as high as some of her evasion counterparts, which tend to just end up being a smidge more accurate. Honestly, though, it's not hard to correct. I would not even remotely call her an inaccurate unit. It's just something that you might want to emphasize just a little bit extra on. From an evasion standpoint, she is an A. So despite what that luck stat was for her base luck, what it ends up being with her 5% on the mastery ability, what she has for the board, what she has for passive, she ends up actually a few percentage points above what Elena typically is. And so you can absolutely gear her to be a top of the game evade unit. And then movement, I'm going A+. I don't think you get much better than this. She's got the move of 4, the jump of 2, and she can get move +1, so a total move of 5 with a duelist buff. So absolutely incredible movement overall. Now her passive abilities, I'm giving her an A-. She's actually got a couple good ones, a couple that you're probably just not going to use very often at all, but there's enough variety in them that you can alter the ways you build her and kind of play with the math behind the scenes of things. We'll get into that in the passive section. The counter abilities, I'm also going with an A- here. She has one that is very unique to her, and that it's a counter attack, but it applies some slash resistance penetration, so it probably hits harder than your average counter attack does, but I don't know if it's overall that impactful to the quality of the game. And we'll talk just a smidge why when we get to the counter section. Her overall kit, I'm giving her an A-. Quite honestly, there almost might be too much there in a good way and a bad way, double-edged sword. But there's a ton that you can do with her kit overall in terms of building her out. For a final grade, I'm giving her an A-. She is a good unit, a great unit. Do you have to pull for her? Honestly, probably not if you already have Elena and Locke. I think those two are completely fine. She just does something different. I'm going to call her like the ketchup of the light element. And we'll talk a smidge more at the end of the general thoughts here on the next slide. So, my general thoughts. She is like a Lego person. And I tried to find like a great analogy for how to describe her, and this is the best I could come up with. You have such a unique way of potentially building her AI that you can just move a piece here and move a piece here, and all of a sudden my Violet ends up being a totally Violet and your Violet. And that's like the biggest takeaway I can give, because a lot of these characters have a certain role, a certain strength they lean into, a certain ability that's like, oh man, like that ability is a game changer. And I don't know if she has any one of those in particular, but she's got a lot that just make a variety of builds really impactful, and we'll talk about that in a second. So a huge amount of AI versatility in her builds due to the buff selection. Now, not all buffs are created equal here, but she has 3 different teammate buffs and 6 different personal buffs. So in terms of what to expect and ramping up how she's going to move to certain directions, what ability she's going to use, ton of versatility there to how you want to build her. She can be built for chain potential, so she does have a double hit on the main job. She's got another triple hit on her sub job, and her limit break is technically a triple hit. So if that's a build you're going for, to kind of go with Elena on the chaining front, you can certainly tweak the AI to prioritize certain abilities to emphasize the chaining potential. You can also build for synergy with varying other different light units. In particular, I'm thinking the missile-oriented units like Jaden, where she's got aim to fire on the gunner sub job. Well, she can go and aim fire Jaden, give him and herself the missile attack up and the range +1. She also has some AP management games with Locke in terms of decreasing enemy AP and restoring her own AP. So she can be a very different unit depending upon which other light unit you put her with. And then finally, fantastic unit for light walls. And this is where I want to talk just a little bit in depth. Now, when we use the word walls or macros, that's typically a term used in the, we'll say, top 25 of the guilds in War of the Visions. And the concept is essentially how many of the same team can you create for defense, with the idea being that if you make 30 really high evasion teams, well, you're betting that the enemy guild doesn't have 30 anti-evasion teams. That you're betting that you just create more teams than your attacking guild can beat. And that's essentially the concept of the macro. And once you have a macro, there's obviously ways that you can make better macros than others. So like a mono earth macro may beat a variety of attack teams, but mono earth may always lose to mono light, for instance. And that's the difference between the top end of the guilds and non-top end of the guilds. And to me, she is a fantastic unit for building light walls, because there's going to be a ton of trickery potentially. And getting into just some of the specifics of this, for instance, if you have a guild war and your team macro is Engelbert slot 1 on all 30 teams, and now that's all you can see. You can't see who the other units are. If you put in Violet and Elena, you're obviously going to see, a decent high attack stat and a decent high magic stat. And when you see that, you're going to think, okay, high evasion / heavy team. That's what you're going to think. But you could also go slot 1 Engelbert, and then those other slots, instead of going Violet and Elena, you could go Violet Jaden. Now all of a sudden, it's not high evasion / heavy. Now it's ranged missile. But you don't know that because it's locked behind Engelbert slot 1. And similarly, you could play games where you have an Elena, but you're not sure by the attack stat, is it a Violet or is it a Locke? Both those characters are very different. Locke will dispel the hate on your tank potentially. Violet will not. Violet will potentially have missile type attacks, and maybe you're gearing more heavily for slash. And then when you think about, all right, well, I have courage remove or re-raise remove. Well, re-raise remove is obviously fantastic, but only against Locke. If it turns out it's a Violet instead, well, now your re-raise remove is kind of worthless. And likewise for courage removal. If you go into a battle thinking I can, ignore courage, and it turns out to be a Locke, well, you're screwed. That's the point I'm trying to get with here, is that she adds an extra wrinkle into things that I think at the top end of the game, you're going to notice her being really valuable. So for your average player, what does that mean? Probably not a must pull. Again, if you're considering mono light and what's strong, if you have Elena and Locke and Engelbert and Jaden, like you're honestly probably just fine. But for the top end of the game, I could absolutely see her being a menace. And the particularly devastating thing about it, she's a menace due to the variety of AI. And this is where some characters can get extremely dangerous, where even if you go into a map and you see Elena and Violet, you don't know what that Violet's going to do. Is that Violet geared for chaining, or is that Violet geared for missile? Does she have a lot of teammate buffs on, so the movement is completely different than the same Violet that might only have the single buffs on, and with the move of 4, she ends up going straight ahead in the battle? So because of that unpredictability and what the enemy Violet AI might do, even if you're able to see a team of 3 and be like Engelbert, Elena, Violet, you don't know what that Violet's going to do, which is a menace for macros, because you can look at 30 teams that are identical or near identical in their stats, but the Violet might have just completely different AI depending upon which version they've built it for. So I see that being a really high IQ theory crafting, like brainstorming way to use her. That's enough talking about that.
And that's all I have to say about that.
So getting into the class job overview here, where we start to see some of this. So passive abilities, she's got 6 of them, which honestly is a bunch. Null Curse you're not going to use much. But to me, the one you're always going to have on is Duelist Lore. You have to. That 12 evasion rate, the 40 defense penetration in this stage of the game, if you don't have that on, she's not going to do anything that she's supposed to do practically. So Duelist Lore is a must. From there, you have a little bit to play with. You can either go A, Grace and Poise, which obviously increases the attack or the crit rate, or B, you can go with Fatal Blade Work, which I think I'm personally a fan of. You get the same critical rate boost, but this one's an increase to crit damage, whereas the other one's a boost to attack. And again, this is where you can like mislead on enemy macros, where if you're trying to get attack stats kind of similar on different teams, well, some Violets might have Grace and Poise on to buff their attack percentage, and some might not, and obviously that'll give you a different total team attack. That's where things get tricky. The Concentrate and the Missile Mastery are obviously a little more unique for when you're using the missile sub-job, but both of them obviously have a time and place as well. Now for the counter abilities, the one that's really unique here is the Perfect 10. So this one always procs when you evade a physical hit. And when you do so, you will counterattack in a decent range for a slash attack that has 30 slash resistance penetration built into it. I think this is a good ability. I don't know if it's great because again, it's only a physical hit. We have a lot of magic users where this just won't do anything. And even then it's when you're evading. So like if you're going against a fellow evade team or a high accurate team, like against a Cloud, well, if Cloud does triple hit, this is not going to do anything for you. To me, this is really like if you're going against, low accuracy physical attack units, which is kind of more rare. So this is good. Not as OP as I think a lot of people thought it might be. To me, I think Mirage Feint is probably the more effective one, particularly if you're combining it with Elena's Anti-Evil, which does basically the same thing. It basically is just a way for you to make the enemy team super extra inaccurate. Now we get to the main job here, Faith. We're going to go through the attack abilities first, and then I'm going to go through the buff abilities. So with Grace is kind of the base ability, 16 AP. It's only one square away, but 175% is a good modifier for that cost. Allow Me is a very, very, very good attack where it is single target, but it is a double hit ability. It is a defense break of 30, and although I wouldn't rely on this chance of paralyzing to actually proc, certainly nice added benefit to it. So I do like this ability a lot. Vorpal Blade in particular is another absolutely stellar ability. Little high on the AP side, but 165% modifier. The big thing here is that the decrease AP to those enemies in a very large AoE size, while also restoring AP upon critical hit for itself. So again, the critical hit rate is vitally important for Violet here in terms of maximizing what she does. This is a great ability. And then we talk about the buffs. Brave Step is a really good one. Increases critical rate by another 25 and crit damage by 25. So I think that's a great ability overall. Dazzle Sigillion is another great ability. This might be her best ability, where it's a teammate buff that where when she or they perform a critical hit, it will restore to 150 CT to that unit. That is a great way to increase, turn order, but it also increases her evasion rate by 25. Extremely impactful ability. If I'm ranking them, I think that's probably the best one, but then obviously It Can't End Yet is also her courage ability, so you want to find a way to weave both of those in there potentially. Overall, great main job. And the sub job for her, honestly, is equally as great. This is a fantastic sub job where don't forget the pose is a triple hit. Now, again, limited in range, you have to be right next to the character, but move of 4, jump of 2 may not be the most difficult thing in the world to position yourself that way. Bless Boost is really interesting, that it's 35 light attack for 3 turns. So again, when you're talking about the potency, do you go for the buff that does the crit damage? Do you go for the one that goes for the light attack? You can do a variety of different things. If you have enough crit rate built into your equipment and your Espers and your vision cards, then you can do Bless Boost instead. And there's a lot of different ways you can obviously play with their builds to achieve that end. Now for the Duelist sub job, this is one of my favorite jobs in the game. I think Duelist is such a cool job. Defensive footwork I think is awesome. This is another way for her to get 25 evade rate if you didn't want to use the teammate buff. It also increases unit resistance by 20 as well. The other buff here, offensive footwork, increases her move by 1, gives her up to a move of 5 total, and increases the crit rate to 25. So again, this one is another crit rate boosting one, but does something very different. Buffing crit rate of 25 compared to the Brave Step one. Both do that piece the same, but Brave Step also increases crit damage of 25, and this one increases move of 1. So those are two vastly different things. Extra crit damage and move of 1. The AI will be completely different based upon which of those abilities you decide to use. And then Ready to Engage, another teammate buff, but this one increase AoE resistance to the teammate and for herself, and grants the following effect to herself. She'll restore AP when performing a critical hit. So kind of similar to Vorpal Blade here. There's some overlap there where you probably wouldn't want to have both on. I actually don't know if they stack. I would need to check that, but I'm like 99.9% positive they don't stack. You would not get 20 AP from doing both, I think. But again, that's where you get to the variety of builds. Maybe you just straight up disable Vorpal Blade and go for the chaining build instead. Have her use Ready to Engage to make up for the AP loss, and instead lean into her just doing more double hits in order to chain with Elena, using her Limit Break to triple hit as well. Like, you can go a variety of different ways. And the attack abilities here are also great. Razor's Edge has some great range for very cheap cost with a 35% extra chance to critically hit. And the Displacer leans really well into her as an evade unit, where it's another way to decrease accuracy of the enemy by 25%. All of these things go well. It's almost too much. That's the point. You can build her in a variety of different ways to do a bunch of different things. And then finally, the Gunner throws a real big wrinkle into this. To me, the huge benefit to this is the aimed fire ability, where I think that goes so well with her and Jaden that, number one, you don't have to worry about putting on a passive to increase the range, where you can do this instead. And again, a completely different teammate buff that's going to set up her to do completely different things, but it's also an extra big buff to Jaden in terms of missile attack, and it allows it so that he doesn't have to use his ability, range +1. He can just rely on her to do it for him. And then Council ability here, this is a positively massive critical hit rate. This is, again, to be like the kind of ability you would use if you're not gearing her. And this is for allies as well. So between her and Elena and Jaden, huge amount of damage potential, particularly because the Elena card is crit damage up, which blends really well with all of this. The only downside to these is that these aren't arc trajectory, they're straight on, and the height is a little bit limited. I think Leg Shot might be the only one that's height of 2. I think Sidewinder too, but that one's obviously a little more limited for range. The bottom line is, this is still a great sub job to throw in there to throw people off. And finally, we get into the Limit Break, TMR and the Mastery. This Limit Break, relatively cheap at 43. It's an extra 50% chance to be a critical hit, and it is a triple hit. So again, huge chaining potential possibilities. Amazing for PvE if you're trying to get that across. For a TMR, I think it's just a fantastic TMR as well, where 7 defense, 12 evade, 12 crit evade's an accessory, which is awesome. And the ability, although it's only one cast, this is a great AP restoration ability. Not only do you get the 20 AP when you level it, but you also get 12 extra AP because you have the TP cost in half. So total of 32 AP immediately, but then the decreased chance of being targeted is also fantastic. That if you're going through the priority of enemies, obviously she's going to be the last one to be attacked because of it. You can go negative for hate, so theoretically this is a great way to make sure she's the last one being hit. The Mastery ability, increased evasion rate of 5 is the unique one, and then attack of 15%, that's what helps bring her attack stat back up to kind of near the top of the board. Now the crit rate highlight, this is some math that I want to do very, very high level for you guys to kind of go over again what is critical hit rate, how do you calculate it, what's crit avoid, what's crit evasion, all those good things. This won't take terribly long, but I made a build here of Violet where I put on the Engine Blade for slash resistance penetration, the evade garb here for the defense penetration. This is Snuggles, which is Halloween Fred. Her TMR I like a lot. Again, if you recall, this is unit resistance down upon critical hit. Well, what better character to put this on than a high critical hit character? The unit resistance down is a really great potential thing to weave into this. Gave her Chaos Odin for the evasion, the Rob card for the extra evasion, and then this light card is also slash resistance penetration while giving her Fatal Blade Work and Duelist Lore. Those are the two that I like overall for her. And for teammate vision cards, I gave Engelbert the Jaden vision card and Secrets of the Heart, and I gave Elena the Elena vision card and Shiva just to round out stats. And when you do all that, Violet ends up with a dexterity amount of 441 and crit rate extra percent of 55. So I'm going to talk about the math, high level, what that means. When you get dexterity of 441, and I'll go through the equation of how you calculate that, your crit rate scales only off your dexterity. So you just take your dexterity, plug it into this one little formula, bam, that's your crit rate. Now how it ends up working effectively, you take your crit rate, the enemy has something called crit avoidance rate, which is determined solely off their luck. So you take whatever their luck is and you get their crit avoidance rate. Hit rate minus avoidance rate equals the actual rate. So we're going to go through that very high level here. The luck stat to determine critical avoidance, this is the equation. Now I can't, the order of operations, do what you will, but if you just go to Excel and enter, this equation equals the luck stat and then the caret and all that, it will give you the crit avoidance rate. And so I have a little table here in increments of 25 where the crit avoid rate is for certain levels of luck. So unit that has 400 luck has an innate 84% crit avoid. Now on the critical hit rate side, dexterity, also relatively simple enough formula to put into Excel, same kind of concept. A character with 450 dexterity will have a crit rate of 112. So effectively, what that means is if you had a character with 400 luck being attacked by a character with 375 dexterity, the crit rate would be the 99 minus the 84, which is a 15% chance that the attacker lands a critical hit. That's how that works. So, just looking at our build of Violet at the moment, and I did use statues as well, like it's like level 7 statues, level 30 light mastery. Assuming she has that 441 dexterity, she does have 55% crit rate just from the Esper and the statues and the vision cards, yada yada. And we're going to assume that the enemy also has 25% crit evasion. They're kind of used interchangeably. What do the hit rates end up being? And so for these varying levels of luck, this is the net crit hit rate. So if you took this Violet, and she was attacking a unit with 450 luck, there's effectively like a 49% chance that it's going to be a critical hit. If you're going against a hyper evade unit that's got 550 luck, the crit hit chance is only 34%. And again, this is the easiest way you can go about this, because once you start throwing in the buffs and whatnot, okay, she does 25% crit rate buff here, and then Locke uses the luck TMR there. Like you get really crazy with what the rates end up being, but this is at least like a really simple framework to at least like start basically understanding it. So overall, you could say with relative ease, before any buffs are applied, Violet is typically in the, like, we'll say 40 to 50% range for the critical hit rate against most high luck units. That will obviously go higher once she starts doing some of her buffs that increase her crit rate. Whew! Thank you for sitting with me through that. Now you already got a quick snapshot preview of what I think some of the best vision cards are. To me, number one, Flash of Insight is like de facto one of the best ones you can put on her. Gives her the extra luck, gives her the slash resistance penetration. Although she can't use Sonic Severance, that's okay. But the rest of this, it's going to increase her attack by 50%. It's going to give her critical evasion. It's going to increase her own evasion rate by 20%. This, to me, is like the number one card you should have on her at all times, if possible. But a damn good second one is Scions of Twilight. So again, kind of the same concept. Great attack, 3 agility, also going to increase her attack. It does decrease the crit rate by 5. Not the biggest deal in the world there, but this card's really more for the slash resistance penetration here, where this gives, if it's the main card, gives up to 35% slash resistance penetration, which she does not have innately in her kit. So it's kind of why you also saw I had the Engine Blade on her, which is slash resistance penetration. This is another form of it. That's why I like the Rob card. It gives her a little bit of it. So you need it in there somewhere, somehow. For those of you that have it, and I'm so jealous if you do, Scions of Behold is also an absolutely amazing card for her, where again, agility of 15%, she's going to drastically benefit from that. Slash attack for the party is going to go a long way, and it's got it on the unit effect. This is an absolutely amazing card. It's like one of the only vision cards I don't have maxed. I'm dying inside because of it.
No, I want one of those!
Another good card that we frequently throw in as the sub-vision card is Sanctum Assassins, where it increases the unit evasion rate, gives her some unit resistance, and also does for the party some increased evasion rate, while also giving just a point or two of agility. This is another great one to throw in there. But that's by and large the vision cards you really want to focus on for her. Now, when we get to the Esper side of things, kind of, again, not limited, but there's a handful of Espers. This is no surprise what they are. The de facto best evade Esper at this state in the game is Dark Odin for majority of units, where it does give the evasion rate in a variety of different nodes here. You can mix in the slash attack, the human killer, and then you have your choice of missile or magic resistance if you're gearing her specifically for certain things. But this is by far like the best in slot evade Esper at the moment for most units. There is a couple others, obviously, where Dark Shimmer is one of them for the same reason that it has 25 evasion. Some slash attack here, but that's really it for the nodes. It's a little bit more limiting. One of the more underrated ones that we talked about with the Locke review that I think is also a fantastic choice for Violet if you have, let's say, Dark Odin on your Elena, is a Glacial, where Glacial gives the luck percentage up here. It's also got the slash attack. It's got attack percent up nodes, some missile resistance overall, another really great Esper. And then finally, one that's a nice benefit for her that not all units get the upside of is Tetrasylphid, where there are missile attack nodes on here. So if you're going, again, for that potential missile build Violet, this is one where you throw the evasion on there, you can increase the missile attack, and although you may not get much use out of the rest of the board, this at least has some synergy with her that not every evade unit has the potential for. And now we get into weapon optimization. Boys, there are a lot for weapons, obviously. Being a sword user, there's an immense amount of variety to choose from. Obviously going to depend upon what you have accessible to you. It's going to depend on what you have for vision cards. It's going to depend on what you have for trust stones. And in no particular order, Engine Blade is one that sticks out to me for the slash resistance penetration. That being said, this one may not be the best because I do prefer slash resistance penetration as a passive on my trust stones, which I'll get to soon, so that will not stack with this. But overall, this is still a relatively good sword otherwise if you don't have access to that trust stone passive. Another amazing sword for offensive purposes is the Sword of Light, where she can equip this. It will obviously get the light attack of 30 with the slash attack of 15. This is also great for the gunner sub job, where light attack will also apply to those gunner abilities. So this is definitely a fantastic sword, and you could probably get away with using the assault. I don't know if you really need the aim build on this, because although she does need some accuracy, I don't think you need to sacrifice the attack on here for it. I think you get the accuracy externally in other ways. But yeah, Sword of Light, absolutely stellar pick for her. Just on the note, Spine Blade is a great choice too, but really obviously for defense penetration. That being said, she does have the passive for it, so it is a little bit overkill, but definitely a good sword if you're trying to cleave through certain kinds of tanks. I do think Mythgraven Blade is also a fantastic option for the decrease in AP consumption, where you saw some of her abilities are on the higher side, so it really depends on which abilities you're trying to prioritize or using and how you want to build that, build the AP there. This does kind of overlap. For those of you that saw my Joker review, I do have a Truststone build that's kind of AP reliant, where increased total AP, decreased AP consumption. Have played some games with that I think this sword really leans into, where you don't have to make a character reliant on using Zizabels. And last but not least, a lot of you are probably wondering, well, where's her sword, the Rapier that came out this week? This is a good sword. It's just very situational for the map type, where slash attack of 15 you can get on most swords. That's really nothing special. And then the attack stats here are good, but again, they don't stand out from the rest. The crit rate of 15 you can find in a lot of places. Nothing terribly special about that either. It's really this ability, the critical hit rate of 20 for 3 turns, but it's only the 3 turns, so it's very map specific, very specific to the AI you're trying to run, where if you're buffing for 2 turns before you attack, you're basically getting no value out of this. But if you're going for the Violet that runs straight ahead on a short map, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of value out of this. So again, completely situational, one of those things that makes her so potentially dangerous and how you build her. And there's probably some other swords in here that are worth mentioning, but that's a lot already. I won't overload you too much there. But that's the whole thing. You can build her a variety of different ways because of the access to that sword. And finally, when we get into Truststone recommendations. So to me, left side, a must is the luck. Anytime you have an evade unit, you have to have this 15% luck. It does end up being like a point or two lower, or a couple, maybe 3 to 4 points lower than the 15 evade that you can do, but the luck, it's so much more worth it because of the accuracy, as well as the 5 to 6% crit avoidance it gives. So overall, definitely go for the 15% luck. On the right side, I'm a personal fan of the crit rate build here. I do know that there's some other really good ones. I'll talk about them in just a second. But to me, this is obviously what she does best. Why not lean into the crit damage? Why not lean into the crit rate of 15? You could certainly use the extra consistency. But there are obviously 2 other, I think, really good options. Number 1, I do think the accuracy 15 is straight up just a good one as well, where she is that, B level accuracy. She needs help somewhere. I think this is one way to build it in. And then obviously the agility one is also kind of a de facto for any evade units as well, where the agility obviously makes them faster and kind of helps their evasion rate, but the evasion rate of 5 also does a little bit as well. So I think any of these 3 really are good, but I think crit rate's probably the strongest one in terms of maximizing her. And then we talk about the passives you really want to hunt for when getting these. On the left side, a lot of times the left side I usually leave blank here because there's a lot of generic ones that are good. This is like a must-have though. You must have luck 10% somewhere on the left side, so just keep that in mind, obviously for the evasion reasons. And on the right side, you have a little bit more to play with, but a couple that stand out to me, obviously crit damage, crit rate, and slash resistance penetration. Now again, these are a little dependent upon what equipment you're using already, where there are some things like the Titus necklace, for instance, or the defense bracer that give crit damage up, so this will not stack with it, but you're not always going to be using those accessories. I still think these are some great ones to hunt for anyway, and they're pretty applicable for the majority of characters. They're not really necessarily unique to Violet, so I think it's a safe bet that you can probably spend the resources to level them up. I think 2 extra ones that are very interesting, and again a little more niche for Violet, but you can probably find some practical use otherwise: the missile attack of 10 and the missile resistance penetration. Because here's the thing, Most times you don't hunt for those weapon type attacks up because most of the weapons already have that modifier, so they don't stack. But since she can only equip swords, there's nothing you can equip on her that's going to be missile attack of 10. So that'll always apply to her and will obviously help her damage a little bit. And the same concept for the missile resistance penetration. Really, again, only unique if you're going for that sub job. That it's a nice little wrinkle to throw in there. And that's the Violet review in a nutshell. This is obviously like a really complex character for a lot of the AI reasons. People have mentioned she's going to potentially be great for PvE, where you can manually control her. That's really where things shine, because obviously AI can get like chaotic in terms of how to predict what it does. But she's overall a strong character. I don't think there's a strong case to that she's a must pull. I don't think there's a strong case that she's a must put into a comp of 3 of Arena or Guild Wars. But in that whole speech I went on earlier about macros and walls and whatnot, she's a very interesting ingredient to throw into your monolite teams that's just going to add another layer of complexity to how you defeat that element, what you're going to expect from the team, what you're going to have to build against. So to that extent, I think she's a really interesting and great unit. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully this is informative. Critiques, comments, questions, all in the comment section below, and I will see you all soon. Take care.